Ladies and gents, my name is Brandon Stover. Welcome to the How to Solve Climate Change course from Plato University. Causes, systems, obstacles, solutions to this global challenge is what you're going to learn here today. When you're ready to learn more skills, join us for free at plato.university. Let's get started with today's lesson. We'll have our expert guests briefly introduce themselves and their credentials for why they are able to speak to this topic.
Hi, my name is Max Åhman, and I'm a researcher at Lund University in Sweden. I've been doing research in my topic, industrial decarbonization and climate policy, since 2011. Before that, I've also been working internationally at UNEP in Nairobi and in Tunisia, and I've also been a civil servant for the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency.
Explain what the industry sector is from first principles.
Energy-intensive industry is a very problematic way from a climate policy perspective. One of the main things is that it's, of course, very energy-intensive. It consumes around 30% of global energy use, depending on how you set the system boundaries, of course. But the climate effect does not only come from combusting fossil fuels or fossil feedstock, but it also comes from the process itself, like turning limestone into clinker for cement production, or using coke in iron and steel production as a reduction agent, or even the worst case of using fossil fuels as a feedstock for producing plastics and other chemicals. First of all, we have to separate the manufacturing industry from the energy-intensive industry, or what we might call the heavy industry. The heavy industry produces basic materials like steel, cement, aluminium, and all other things that we need in our daily lives. These materials are also a necessity in the future if we're supposed to build a low-carbon world. That is the first problem. We cannot really get rid of them. The focus of climate policy has so far been mostly on the energy issue and not on the materials issue.
Why is the industry sector a problem that causes climate change?
One problem with the energy-intensive industry is the way it works. It is very embedded into the use of fossil fuels. The process in itself is built around fossil fuels. And they're also very heavy industry in terms of very long investment lead times. A blast furnace in a steel mill can, for example, hold up to 60 years, but it needs relining every 20 years or something like that. A cement kiln could last even longer. They're also very bulky investments, several billions to build one of these plants, which makes them also inert in the sense that you don't change them overnight. Another problem from a climate policy perspective is that the added value of producing these needed basic materials is quite low compared to the products that it actually end up in, meaning there is few incentives or very sort of tight margins within the industry in itself to accept higher costs, unless there is a very high carbon price.
Why is the industry sector important to address? What's at stake if we don't address it?
Well, there are several reasons why we need to address climate effects from the heavy industry. One is, of course, we need to meet the Paris targets set in the Paris Agreement, of course. That means that we roughly have to be zero emission industries by 2050. That is not very far away in the future for a heavy industry that usually have lead times around 20 years or even longer between major renovations. That's from a climate policy perspective. Another issue is that these industries are also heavy air pollutants and also heavy wastewater pollutants. And those things need also to be addressed at the same time. And that can actually be done. A third issue is from an industrial perspective. If we assume that we will actually meet the Paris target or come close to it, investing now in fossil structures, in fossil industry, may risk to make them obsolete or stranded, as we say, in the coming 10 years or 15 years. Basically, we will lose a lot of valuable assets that we should have redirected financial flows through way earlier. Another very key issue for these industries that they need to change, they need to transform in order also to save the communities they're serving, because there's usually are quite well embedded into the very fabric of these countries, these cities where they actually are working.
How might we eliminate or mitigate the problems of the industry sector?
The good news is it can be done. We can actually achieve zero emissions in heavy industry. The first is always to look at energy efficiency. All assessments point that usually 20 to 30% more energy efficient is easily to achieve within the coming 10 years. But that is not enough, not by far. We need to reach zero. So by that, we also need to change the very core processes, the very sort of way these industries work. And that can actually be done. The steel industry is spearheading this development now, and it's going quite rapidly. And it builds a lot on, instead of using the fossil coal to produce coke, they use hydrogen to reduce the iron ore to iron. Cement is exploring CCS, carbon capture and storage, which might be a necessity since the CO2 emissions comes to around half of it comes from the lime, clinkerization of lime. The worst case is actually the petrochemical industry, since there the fossil fuel, oil in this case, is actually embedded in the product in itself. But this can also be changed by using captured carbon and using hydrogen. You can produce chemicals that way. You can also produce biomass. All we need to take care that biomass is a limited resource and should be used only where it's actually really necessary to use. Further to that, we need and we must also address material efficiency and sufficiency in society. We can reduce our material use a lot by basically being more efficient in the use of it. And then we also might eventually ask ourselves, how much stuff do we actually need?
What are the best resources to learn more about the industry sector in relation to climate change?
Which resources are the best to learn about this? Well, it might be boring, but I would actually start with the IPCC Working Group 3 chapter on industrial decarbonization. Recent, and it pinpoints the main strategies that I've just mentioned and talked about before. And then I would also look at the Green Steel Tracker that give you some hope of how quick and how forceful this transformation actually can happen. That would be also a very good start to understand. I would also look at the Global Energy Monitor. It includes more than steel, but it also includes the whole infrastructure surrounding all industrial things, just to get a grasp of the scale and of the size of this transformation. Further to that, I've also included in the list a recent paper on industrial policy that covers all the different things that needs to be done in order to spur this development. Industrial policy is needed. We cannot solely rely on a carbon price.
Right now, you're speaking to passionate students who want to actually solve problems like these. What top 3 skills should they study so that they actually have the ability to do so?
The skills needed by you to be sort of a force of the good here is first, I would recommend to actually some engineering and system analysis courses, just in order to understand how the industry works, how big it is, and what it actually is done. That doesn't mean you have to be a metallurgist or petrochemicalist. You just need to understand roughly how big it is, how long lead times there are, and where they're located, and how they actually operate. Fact is a powerful tool. The second skill that I would adopt is a global perspective. These materials are traded globally, and this transition that is coming will have an effect on trade, will have an effect on competitive advantages of countries, and we need to understand this better if we're supposed to do it in a fair and respectable way. This last skill, actually, I would ask you to kind of adopt a life cycle perspective on all this, and be aware also that even if we manage to sort of reduce emissions to zero for these industries, they will require a lot of energy anyway, and that will in itself create new problems that needs to be dealt with. And it will also be able to produce a lot of justice concerns globally that also need to be dealt with.
Any final recommendations for the audience?
No solution is perfect. Lastly, I would ask of all of you to question the status quo in industry. There's plenty of evidence now that transition is possible. Even though it's still located in a few countries and in a few sectors, this can be copied in other sectors and globally. I think that is the most important things, to question the status quo and not forget also that we may have to look at material efficiency and circularity. These are also key aspects of any global transition. Thank you for listening.
Let's now dive into what Max covered about industry by seeing it for ourselves. Choose a specific industry and research its major sources of carbon emissions. Identify key processes or technologies contributing to these emissions. Reflect on the scale of impact and potential strategies for reducing emissions in that industry.
Thank you for taking the How to Solve Climate Change course. If you want to learn the skills to solve this global challenge, join us for free at plato.university for exclusive content, extra resources, and actionable exercises with every lesson. This course was produced by Plato University, where students turn passions into purpose and learn skills to change the world. Learn more at plato.university.